Achha, hey, the last one got cut off because I accidentally reloaded the page because in macOS, if you do the double finger thing and like scroll in any direction, it goes back. So that video I deleted because it has a lot of time of me just waiting for people and asking if people were there. But all right, so I'll wait for people to show up, and as soon as I guess enough people are here, I will begin. Acha. For some reason, I don't see the comments on this page either. So I'll have to reload a tab on the other side to be able to look at the comments. Can you just tell me like if I'm audible and loud and clear and stuff? Shuna jaচ্ছে? I see Abrar's here. Who else? How do I figure out who's watching? Sorry, this is my first time doing this. I have no idea who's watching. Abrar's here. Hi. Okay, so you can hear me. That's great. Acha, so there's a mosquito here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look through my post and I'm going to look at the things that you wanted to learn, and I'll discuss that. So my first thing I thought when Fardeen told me to Fardeen Ishak told me to talk about philosophy is that there is so much to speak of, and this is such broad an issue, and all of it might not help you in debating. As in, I can name different philosophies like existentialism and nihilism and Epicureanism, which Warish talks about a lot. And I don't see how all of these can directly impact your debating. So I was unclear on what specifically to talk about. Also because a lot of the times when people talk about philosophy debates, so for instance, one of the motions in UADC was that this house believes that in the face of atrocities, death is better than bondage, right? And a lot of people would be like, oh my God, that's a philosophy debate. Or the motion at BRAC Gender's Final, the year before this one, that this house would prefer to live in a world where everybody wore uniform gray jumpsuits. So these are the debates that kind of get classified as philosophy. But in most of the cases, they're not very different from normal debates, to be honest, because all you have to do is imagine what that world would look like and why, or is that world preferable and why is it not? But the reason people probably do this is probably because although every motion has some philosophy to it, those motions seem like they directly challenge and make you think philosophically about one thing. For instance, are we as humans like people who judge based on what other people wear, and how much does that play a part in how we judge people? So that's pretty much why probably this classification exists. But for those motions, normally, if you just visualize what that world would look like, and if you try to answer this question, I don't think you need a lot of extensive knowledge on philosophies to figure most of it out. So I want to start with the things that people asked. The first thing, the first comment I see is someone asked, Ahad bin Azad asked, talk about the basics of key philosophical concepts like utilitarianism, consequentialism, and etc. All right, so utilitarianism basically means that we value things or respect things based on the impact it creates. So under utilitarianism or consequentialism, which is pretty similar, so you're basically saying that whether a thing is good or bad is dependent on the amount of benefits it does to the largest amount of people it does. So if something benefits more people, that's probably more utilitarian than other thing that benefits a smaller number of people, or something that benefits some people much more than than the other policy is probably more utilitarian. So in general, this seems like that a no-brainer, right? So obviously things that have more utility are good. Obviously things that help more people are good. But the usual conflict that can appear in utilitarianism is that how do you quantify how do you quantify the level of good, and how do you compare the level of good done to one individual to perhaps the quantity of people for whom you're doing that good. So one debate that this I think pops up in is I'm not sure, I think this was the 3v3 fundraiser debate tournament we had earlier this year. There was a motion about there being a city called I'm not sure, maybe it was Olmeca, where people live very, very good lives and everyone is happy at the expense of one individual who is deep down in, like, in the core of that city, who suffers intolerable pain every second. And the motion was that, this was the info slide, the motion was that this house would save the child or remove the child from that place or let that child free. I think what these debates do is that it challenges you to try to quantify whether the number of people that gets benefited are more important, or the pain on that one individual is more important. And to be fair, I don't think there is a clear answer. I don't think you can like say with certainty that one is more true than the other. So in most of these times when you argue on these philosophies, you sort of have to illustrate and try to show how like those benefits work. So what kind of things could you talk about? I think one important distinction that one side of this debate could make is that even if you do a lot of good to a lot of people, as long as someone is left behind and doesn't like get the benefit of that good, their pain or like all of that isn't comparable to the good that you do, because these are different people and they're like different numbers of people. So based on that, you could probably try to argue of why you think that one individual deserves better, and etc., etc. Like, acha. So that's that. Acha, ethics, morality, existence, and metaphysics. Again, like very broad topics. So I'm not sure what I can say about ethics, like what particular ethical question are you interested in? And like, yeah. Acha, so I think utilitarianism niye ekটু bola jay seta hocche the direct opposite to utilitarianism, if you want to talk, like if you think about it, would be something we call deontology. And this is something that you can see, that you always see in the trolley problem, right? In the trolley problem, you're asked to either flip a switch to kill 5 people, or to kill one individual, as opposed to let 5 other people die as a natural consequence. So if you believe in utilitarianism throughout, I think most of the times you'll want to flip that switch because you save those 5 people. But deontology basically says that things are good or bad because of inherent reasons. So things are, killing someone isn't like good because like good or bad based on the effect it creates, but killing itself is something that's so terrible that no one should do it. That's pretty much what deontology is. So under that, I think what it says that if you flip the switch, you're the one responsible for that person's death. So effectively you've killed that person. So that's probably something that's bad. I don't think you can, like most of the times, have debates in either a purely utilitarian world or a purely deontological world. I think purely utilitarian worlds are more doable. But that's usually one side of the debate. The other side probably has to talk about a different form of utilitarianism. So even under utilitarianism, there are 2 divisions. There is act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. My God, I'm stuttering so bad. Acha. So act or rule er moddhe difference ki? Act means that act utilitarianism is basically that every single action as it happens, you judge that action based on the good it does or the bad it does. As simple as that. So for instance, is it right to kill like baby Hitler? That's a question that a lot of authors asked when the thought of the concept of time machines started appearing in books, right? So a lot of time machine books and like the initial ones were about whether you'd go back and kill this individual who created a lot of harms in society, but at the point at which you kill them, they haven't done those things yet, right? So I think under act utilitarianism, you can sort of justify it by saying that, look, this is going to end up saving a lot of lives, so it's okay to do. It's okay for me to kill this person. But rule sort of contests that in saying that most of the times when we make those individual decisions, we don't really have the full capacity to understand the effect it does. So for instance, when we think that perhaps killing an individual in a certain place will cause overall good because that individual might have killed many other people or tortured many other people in the long term. Often these decisions are spur of the moment decisions that we make right there. And often we don't have the capacity to properly think it through, I guess, because no matter how thorough you're trying to be as humans, you probably will make mistakes if that issue is something perhaps that's close to you or otherwise. So in terms of rule utilitarianism, you basically make a set of rules that give you maximum utility for all the times. For instance, you say that no one other than the state should be allowed to kill anybody. And you say that because even though in certain instances, perhaps letting someone kill a horrible individual might end up saving a lot of lives, you're not sure if most people will be able to make that right choice under that duress. So you make these rules up, so to speak, from before, and like those rules are also based on utility, not deontology. So not not rooted in this like line of thought that it's inherently bad for some reason. It's still rooted in whether it brings the maximum good or bad, but you judge based on broad instances where these rules would apply as opposed to individual instances. So that's the difference between act and rule. I think this is where most debates happen, because obviously one side of the house, like for instance, if this is a debate of giving someone the power to do something, most of the times, like more specific example, if I go for a more specific example, if this is a debate, let's say, for lowering the burden of proof, reversing the burden of proof for rape cases, one side, the side that argues that you should reverse this, probably argues from an act utilitarian standpoint, where you try to say that this will probably make more sense, whereas the other says that inherently this probably shouldn't happen because in a broad set of circumstances, you can't really let the justice system become the aggressor at any point, right? So that's pretty much where most debates happen, I think. Acha, existence. Existence ne ki ase? Like there's a couple of motions about human existence. I think one of these popped up in Genders this year, about if an alien race is here to try to destroy us, this house would die. So like, I think the questions that could pop up here is that to what extent do humans deserve to exist? Because we've done a lot of harms to humanity, like to other species and etc. We're probably the only species that have deliberately made other species extinct. I mean, not because we had to do it for survival, but because of just pleasure, like we love to hunt and stuff like that. But I guess you could also talk about existence in terms of what value existence has. That I really don't see what kind of a value that could have in a debate. If you think it could, perhaps, I don't know, write it down so that I could see and answer your questions. I'll move on to the next one. The topics that help me win most debates. I'll come to that in a bit. Achha, rationality of something, fulfillment of individual rights. Okay. All right. This is something that would probably be more helpful to newer debaters. It's that most of the times the way we run principle debates, or when we talk about rights, our arguments usually sound like this. By the way, principles are probably also strongly related to philosophies, because most of the times they're actually philosophies, a philosophy, I mean, a way you believe that something should be done. Acha. So most of the times when we talk about rational, when we talk about fundamental rights and etc., our arguments about fundamental rights sound something along the lines of, okay, these people deserve these rights. And at that point, you really don't have anything more to argue on, because sure, they deserve those rights. So what? So most of the times when you make these arguments about rights, make sure that you're not basing those, you're not making those arguments about whether some people deserve the rights or not, but rather why it's important that you give them those rights. And this is also important to talk about something else. A lot of the times people make this distinction between principle and utilitarian debates or consequentialist debates and think that these are separate things, right? But ultimately, every principle argument has some layer of utility to it, and every utilitarian argument has an underlying principle. So most of the times they are very interconnected. So most of the times, a lot of principle arguments you can win. You actually win by presenting the utility of that principle, of why that principle is so important. For instance, I think you might remember a few years ago, there was this common trend of motions along the lines of whether, to what extent should we extend free speech? Should people be allowed to the right to offend, right? So the principle is, yeah, sure, people should be allowed the right to say what they want, because the right to say, the freedom of speech is the thing that only applies when it can actually protect you. Because otherwise, if you're saying things that doesn't offend people, no one wants to stop you from talking. So the freedom of speech doesn't really work. But then this argument mostly, back in the day, the most people used to stop it there. But the real value of these arguments is the effect it brings, right? So what happens if you create a world based on the principle that people should not have the right to offend? What are the impacts of that principle, right? So a lot of the times when you make arguments about fundamental rights, That's what you're doing. Oh my God, so many questions. Again, for some reason it's not showing. Okay. What? Lauren, you should not do that. You should definitely watch Syed Sadiq's public debate in the auditorium. Acha, Omela's motion. Yeah, exactly. That's the motion I was talking about. Can we please fuck? What? Sajid, what are you talking about? Oh, right. What are your thoughts, Acha Abrar? What are your thoughts on negative responsibility by discuss the idea people should be responsible of their consequences of inaction? Acha, I think obviously you can argue this both ways. You can probably say that people should be responsible, like because, Acha. So this matters a lot based on. For me, it like what matters is what kind of an effect could that person have had. First of all, second, was that person really aware of the effects of their inaction? Right. So a lot of the times we don't act in certain instances because we think our actions aren't important enough and our actions won't really have a lot of effect. And the other times we think that like the consequences, like the other times we don't really understand our inactions could lead to bad consequences. When we think that someone else will probably do that thing. So Amra act with this, no, we're not saying anything about it, someone else will. That's also something related to a concept called the tragedy of, no, wait, not tragedy of the commons, that's different. I'm sorry, I got this messed up. Anyway, so for me, it's dependent on those two factors. If I think the way to prove that someone are responsible for the consequences of inaction is to prove that an average rational human being at that point should have understood those consequences, and to prove that that person had ways or other avenues to know that. So you kind of have, in debates, you kind of have to prove that there were so many avenues through which these people, that person could have gotten that information. So if they didn't know, it's because they were willfully ignorant. And that's how you can prove that they're like responsible for the consequences of that inaction. The other thing you could do is you could try to present that the individual, like if you try to present that the individual didn't understand the value of it, it's still like hard to explain why, like how you can blame them for it. That will require you to explain why it was their direct responsibility to understand, and again to prove why they had other means to understand. Acha. Okay, so I think that's all the questions I've seen so far. Okay, acha, I'll move back to the initial thread. Jekhane questions ase. Acha, rationality of something. Okay, what thing? And Acha, I'm going to make an assumption here, and I'm going to say that, like, think that you probably mean that, like, whether a group of people are rational enough to do something, right? Whether they have the ability to make that choice. I guess the best way to prove it is to prove duress, that there are other factors that are making sure that they can't make the perfect decision right now. But an interesting thing that I wanted to talk about here was about this debate we did last night, online debate se ekhane. There was the debate about whether people should be allowed to take out-of-court settlements. Now, for workplace harassment and workplace discrimination and sexual harassment. Now, the common trend is, and the first thing that comes to your mind is that, look, these people don't have like full rationality because they're under duress and whatnot, and like they're poor, so they have money, so they're not going to be able to like make that decision. I think a lot of times you can prove this by explaining why that decision is so important to those people. For instance, from OP, I feel that, and this is something that I thought that I did in that debate, that I felt that it was a good idea to talk about how much going after their attackers means to those people. And therefore, the fact that they would be somehow coerced into not taking that decision and just taking the money is hilarious and absurd. So in most cases, because it means so much, because the trauma, like the pain they've caused is so much, and these people recognize that this discrimination hurts, is the reason why they, if they had a choice, they would always definitely go after their attackers. And therefore, if they haven't, it's because on a scale of probabilities, it's probably because they took that rational choice, that like more harm would come out of it, right? Again, the better way to, like, another way to counter this is to say that these other people have ways to scare them into thinking that. But I think conviction is an argument that you can use in a lot of cases to prove rationality, and this is something that a lot of people don't do. So wanted to mention that. Oh no, Wasif Apu's here, and God, this is scaring me. Acha, I'm sorry if I'm saying weird stuff, Wasif Apu. Acha. What else? Okay, communalism versus individualism, ethics of family, whistleblowing. Okay, thank you, Srijan. These are good things to talk about. Acha, communalism versus individualism. Right. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this debate because it onek bar hoise. But there was this one about how Asian values are like whether Asian values are more preferable to Western values. It actually happened in East-West as well this year. So basically, this debate is about like whether like communalism is a better idea or individualism is, because individualism is basically what the Western values are all about, right? A fun thing in these debates that happen is that you will often lose points, or you will often lose this debate because you will fail to compare between the two sides, because it's like the biggest problem here is that when you're trying to say good things about communalism, your benefits will probably work on society as a whole. And it will work on a large bunch of people, and these will be marginal benefits that a lot of people can enjoy by like sacrificing their freedoms. Whereas most of your harms, when you try to explain why individualism is a good thing, on the other side of the motion, is on the individual. So for instance, for communalism, apart from the idea of like wealth sharing and the idea of people looking after each other, it's also possible to prove that in a more communalist system, you're less likely to like do things like damage the environment, because in an individual case, you're always weighing it out based on whether it helps you. But in a communal case, you'll probably think about other things as well. So you're less likely to do holistic damages to society, to environments and whatnot. And because that's the strongest argument on that side, and on the other side, the strongest argument is that individually, a lot of people lose out because these leaders like say that something's good for you, and turns out you might not like it as much. The most important thing about debates that challenge these principles is to compare whether the individual's needs are, whether it's more important to cater to the needs of the society, or it's more important to cater to the needs of an individual. This might sound self-explanatory, but I've judged one too many debates where in this motion or motions like this, teams did not compare, and I actually had to make those comparisons myself. Okay, do I need to refresh this page again? I'll try doing that. Whistleblowing, ethics in military, corporate culture, politics, justice. Okay, I'll talk about justice at length. Ekটু পরে. Acha. Okay, so what are the things that I left out? Ethics, morality, and justice. Acha. So I left out these things because I felt that there's this motion that I would like to discuss. So this is a debate that we did in UADC. The motion stands, wait, where are we? Round 3. This House would allow the retrospective application of laws for felonies that were committed in the period before, in the period where they were not criminalized. So from Goth, what this motion asks you to do is that it asks you to talk about, it's asking you to explain why these individuals who at that point didn't know that something was a crime and still did it, still did that like action, and like because they didn't know that it was a crime, why are they still culpable? So in justice debates, principles become very important, and also based on that, philosophy becomes very important, because basically you need philosophy to craft those principles. Acha. So why do I say so? Because usually in most of the debates we do, the most important thing is to prove that there is a bunch of good impacts on each side. In debates about justice, however, there's an added layer, which is to say, you also have to prove if someone deserves something. So for instance, it's not just whether retrospectively punishing these people gives you benefits or impacts, like victims get closure and etc., just because those victims, like we as a society failed them, doesn't mean they have to suffer that, but also why this person really deserves that punishment. I think that's where principle arguments kind of shine. Acha. So what are the things you can talk about? The reason I talk about this, like I'm talking about this motion in particular, is because we had like in our opinions, Navid, Ryan, and I had a very good case. And here are the things that we talked about, and most of these were like in lines of principles. So the first thing we said is that, look, if an individual, if you're going to say that this individual is not culpable because he didn't know at that this was a crime at that point, you can't win this debate. Here's why. Because what are felonies, like these are usually serious crimes, right? And in most of the times, like, I mean, if you're dealing with a serious crime, it's not that you do that crime because you don't know that it's bad. It probably appeals to your humanity, and you probably understand that depriving someone of some right or depriving someone of their property is something that's bad. But why do people still do it? They do it not because they can internally justify that this is good, but they do it either because they prioritize their own needs over the needs of those people, which requires them to, or B, they just do this like entirely, which requires them to like dehumanize these people, right? So the only reason that people from the West could come during the colonial period and justify killing all of the people in these places is because they could like look at them as subhuman. If that's true, then probably the people who did those crimes, I mean, if you say that they didn't do the crime, like they should be let go because they didn't know that this was a crime back then, what that means is the only thing that prevented them from committing that act was the fear of repercussion. So the next question is, whether a person deserves punishment or not, is whether a person deserves punishment or not dependent on, like, I mean, should it matter that these people didn't know that there were consequences, right? So because that means that they were bad people inherently, they did something that's bad. It probably appealed to their humanity that, okay, this was probably not something that's good, but they dehumanized them anyway. And saying that I should be let go because this wasn't a crime back then basically means that I did it because I could get away with it, because like there was no threat on my life or on anything on that behalf, on that point, right? The second thing we argued is quite simple, is saying that just because, so all right, so this is an argument that a lot of people would make, and this is fairly simple. People would say that, look, just because you were born before these laws were enacted doesn't mean that bad things didn't happen to you. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't deserve justice. But the way to take this argument a step further is to think about who's responsible for that fact, right? And again, this is a common thing in like in these, when you're trying to analyze these principal arguments, always ask these questions like, who's responsible for this? Does someone deserve it? And to what extent they deserve it? So we asked ourselves, who is responsible for the fact that that these laws were enacted so late? Because the global conscience, like probably evolves a lot like faster than laws do, because laws are basically the codified versions of our global conscience. So if we globally think, a lot of people come together and think that this is something that's unethical, and a lot of people agree, then we codify it and turn it into law. For instance, for homosexuality to be something that by law was like, was decriminalized, we as a collective society had to first understand that this is ethically wrong to criminalize these people. So tar mane society knew for a long time that these crimes were bad. Why didn't we make them into laws? We didn't because of multiple reasons, but this means that it's the government, the legal system, and society's overall failure that we couldn't put these things into law. Which is to say, now it is our responsibility to ensure that we give these people justice, because they didn't get justice because we failed to accept the global consciousness or conscience fast enough, and we failed to integrate that into our legal systems. So basically, the reason I'm telling you this is to show how we make principal arguments normally, and how these arguments could be made better by asking these additional questions. Acha, I am at this point going to look for more like questions from the audience if there's any. Acha. আর কিছু দেখতেছি না। Okay. Acha, so other things that you could talk about within justice debates. And so in justice debates, you always have to compare between a few philosophies, right? You have to compare between like whether things are whether basically you want to punish people because they've done something bad and you want to punish them to like regardless, or whether your system is more reformative and you're trying to reform these people into making like their lives better. I think if you're like, it's quite easy to argue on like the Reformation kinds of justice, because you can always say that, look, people deserve a second chance, and like these people probably haven't done these crimes because of their because they were inherently bad, but probably did it also because they were born in circumstances that didn't allow them to like fully live up to their potential, and these circumstances sort of coerced them into doing these things. So reformative justice is quite easy to argue, right? But like there's this little trick which you can use for retributive justice. So why is retributive justice a thing? Like, because we normally consider vengeance as something that's bad. I mean, most of the times our values point us towards like forgiving and forgetting and like not exacting vengeance. But retributive justice kind of does look like vengeance. So why is this justified and why is this good? I think there are two broad things. First, if you consider human beings living in harmony without anything bad happening to them, and like if I want to, how do I put this, plot their mental states in a graph, perhaps it will be just a straight line because everyone's like they're stable, they don't feel wronged, and they feel all right, right? So when someone does a crime, what do they essentially do? What they do is they like take something from someone else and they enrich themselves. This works when they're stealing something, obviously, but this also works when like these are violent crimes like murder and etc. Because if you like kill someone, I mean, if it's for personal gain, it's obvious. But if it's basically due to rage, it's basically you did it to gain emotional parity and etc. I guess. But in return, basically you damage the rest of society because the rest of society now has to live in fear that this could happen to me any moment and this could happen to me any minute. So essentially, you've taken that mental energy from the rest of society, to enrich your own. If you like think of it like that, if you make that principle, then it's completely all right to punish this individual so that the rest of society can gain closure and come back to zero again and come and feel equity again, right? So that's one way you can justify retributive justice, that the rest of society needs to feel sort of feel at home and safe again. I think I forgot the second way. Really should have written this down. I'll let you know if I remember this at any point. Acha. Okay, so look, this discussion about philosophies probably can only work if you keep on asking me stuff, right? Acha, power of social contracts. Okay, fine. What are social contracts? Basically, this is something like we used to argue a lot age. It's basically it's called an invisible contract, like an intangible contract that you sign, which basically means that you give up a lot of responsibilities and rights to your governments and like basically your state in order to get safety in return. So you agree to be ruled by that government, you agree to lose your right to be violent and etc. And you gain safety and protection from the using the police force and etc. in return. That's pretty much what it is. Most of the times back in the day when people used to make social contract arguments, they used to talk about how something being done breaches that social contract and therefore that person should be punished or something of that sort. That's pretty much it. Yes. Given that was the justice system fault for not making such things into law, why should anyone else pay the price? Okay. No, not acha. So this is not really the same justification, right? The justification of why that person should pay the price rests on the other argument that they had ample the way you show that person deserves to pay the price is by showing that they had enough ways to know that this was a bad thing. They still did it because they dehumanized someone else. And if you say that the only thing that would have prevented them from doing that was for these things to be codified into law, you're saying that they did it simply because they could get away with it. That's a different justification. I think the justification that we do here is why it's necessary and why it's so important for state and like the legal system right now to give those victims closure. Because giving victims closure is like in a lot of cases an argument that can often gets overturned by more utilitarian arguments, which says that there are physical benefits to physical people and etc. right? But you can use this line of thought to sort of strengthen these closure arguments and say that this is why it's extremely important why these people deserve closure. And then you need to weigh it out. Is it more important as a society that we protect these people who we promised to protect and they aren't protected because we failed to protect them? Or is it more important for us to give credence to someone who did this crime and is using the fact that there is no law as an excuse, because we've already proven that they had ample opportunities to know, and that this was something that, and that like saying this literally means that the only reason you're not doing it is because you don't want to, you're afraid of the repercussions. Acha, the other question is brief of nihilism. I don't think you have to debate nihilism often. Like I don't see a way how this can happen. Like give me an example if you can. But like mostly, what nihilism is the idea that nothing really has any inherent meaning. So often in life we think that like family is cool, and like why do we think family is such a great thing? Probably because the benefits it gives us, but then for most people there is an inherent reason they think so, and that's because they think that family has inherent value. So the philosophy of nihilism says that nothing has inherent value. Things have value when we assign value to things, right? So basically, like saying that family is important because I think it's important to me, and I want it to be important. So for me, it's a it's a philosophy that allows you to sort of live your life to the fullest. Like, I feel so arky. Acha. This house prefers a philosopher king to a tyrannical democracy. Eta na debate weird, because it sort of assumes that this king is going to be good. I mean, and the democracy in and of itself is bad. Acha na, it's still doable. Okay. So you're basically arguing whether you'd rather have choice and have terrible circumstances where you live in, or you'd rather have someone dictating thing and you'd not have choice, but you'd have good amenities and stuff like that. I don't think you can come up and say that this tyrannical democracy is always going to be harmful to like all minorities, and the philosopher king will always help all minorities, because I mean, if you go to that line, it becomes very obvious why this motion should go for government all the time. But like, I think the case you can build is based on Singapore and I guess the rest of the Western liberal world. Because in Singapore, and I think maybe get Srijan to talk about this sometime, in Singapore, you probably wouldn't have a lot of control because I guess like the central party controls a lot of things, right? And like until recently, people couldn't even form a different party, as far as I know. I might be wrong. If anyone like knows that I'm wrong, please correct me. But on the flip side, people can walk freely at night. People don't have to worry about like getting shot randomly in the streets. People don't have to worry about a lot of these things. So that inherent safety that comes with good governance gives you a lot of freedom. So here, you're basically comparing which freedom is more important and which thing gives you more freedom. Do you get more freedom when you have safety and security, and therefore are allowed to move and go wherever you please and do businesses without being infringed and etc.? Or do you have more freedom when you have a direct say in policies and etc.? I guess direct say in policies is more long-term, where you think that you can change the ways things work. But if you talk about a tyrannical democracy, this probably won't happen, so you can slightly change it. So at that point, you have to debate on that marginal. In this debate, you'll probably require, and I think this is true for all philosophy debates, you need to paint very clear pictures of what these two worlds would look like. And these pictures will always be contested, because throughout the debate, different people will have different ideas of what these like what a tyrannical democracy means, or what a philosopher king is likely to be like. So most of these debates will be won and lost on characterization. So from the start, you just keep on characterizing, and your opponents will probably make a different characterization, and you'll kind of have to keep justifying why, in most cases, your characterization is likely, to be closer to the truth. This house prefers a world where God is portrayed as an imperfect being. Okay. Lots of ideas, actually, like way too much to be exact. So first of all, God being portrayed as a perfect being means that you're trying to tell people that God is perfect and he wants the perfect things, and like things he's doing is to test you, and you're using that to make people like do something. I think the idea of God being a perfect being is comforting, and that's a comfort that a lot of people would like, because it lets them live the rest of their lives knowing that even if bad things happen to them, they're not really bad things. So for instance, when bad things happen, religious people would come up and say that, oh no, this is a test. So that's something you can only do in case of a perfect God. And that, I think, is actually even more helpful when it comes to poorer people. especially people who are stuck in a cycle of poverty and can't get out, because these people will probably not be able to attain happiness in life. So the least you could give them is that you can give them the ability to keep thinking that God is there looking out for them and things will eventually look good for them. So that's one side of it. The other side where we talk about an imperfect God is where you can justify a lot of things that God does. So for instance, in this world, you have no reason to try to like justify all of the actions of that particular God as good, which is to say, you can cherry pick instances from the religious books and like claim that this is where God did the best thing. So you can both have that idea of a supreme being there and there being some level of safety net when you die and etc. And at the same time, you can also rule out a lot of things that is in those scriptures that you don't agree with or like is like bad. Okay. And you can say that because God is imperfect, he's made those mistakes. And I think you can do this debate better if you think about how the Greek pantheon works, or like, I mean, also the way Hindu gods and goddesses work, because none of them are omnipotent, omniscient, and everything. Like Zeus, for instance, did a lot of terrible things, but then these gods are more looked like as a force of nature. So like it gives you some level of safety in terms of uncertainties, where you can think that, okay, if I pray to this god, maybe he will support me. So for instance, if your plane is crashing and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna die, and your last moments are going to end in objective horror, if you think that there is an imperfect god, you can like even in terms of an imperfect God, you can take that benefit where you can say that I'm going to pray, maybe if I pray for the God of thunder and wind, I'll be saved. So oi pointed, you have relief. And at the same time, you can also build a society that isn't governed by one of those like bad things in those scriptures, right? You know what I mean? So it's a sort of a best of both worlds thing, but it has a lot of problems as well, because that leaves these scriptures to be open to interpretation. So when you say these gods are imperfect, everyone has the ability to choose what these gods are going to be like. Again, you need to characterize why, in most cases, people are likely to choose these, likely to make the better decisions. In which you can say that, I think one thing I would like talk about now, which is that I would talk about how the way human consciousness and like ethics evolved is that aste we got more ethical, aste we got better at like protecting other people. Which is to say, as time progresses, if you portray God as an imperfect being, your how do I put this? Your interpretations of which part of God is the good thing and which part of God is the bad thing will consistently get better as society progresses. So again, it's that thing where you can take hand in hand the benefits of a utilitarian morality, as well as taking the benefits of having religion on your side. Opposes the narrative that that history inevitably moves towards a particular end. Sami, are you making that up? I don't understand how that, like, this looks too weird to be emotion that was somewhere else. This house would take a pill to make us feel nothing but sadness. I don't know. I guess sadness makes you a better person, because if you're sad, you think about the reasons you're sad, and you think about the bad things that happened to you, which in turn could make you think about the bad things you did to other people. So it could make you a better person. It could also make you a more terrible person, because you might attribute that sadness to other people and just be angry. Oh wait, you can't feel angry, so you just feel sad. Okay, this is very hard to conceptualize. Acha, I think I just remember, like, a much better debate is the finals of East-West, right? This was prefers a world where everyone suffered from imposter syndrome. Like in that debate, I think, like, Acha, my laptop is charged and I can't connect my charger properly because it's working. Right. In that debate, you can basically argue about how these mental illnesses and etc. are most, like, the question is, are these things a problem because it functionally deters you, or are these things inherently problematic because it makes you feel bad, right? I think that's an integral part of that debate, because if it's inherently bad, if it's bad because it inherently makes you feel sad, then you shouldn't really prefer that kind of a world. But if it's bad because it gives you disadvantages, which is a functional way of looking at it, it means that if everybody suffers from this, then no one's really getting disadvantaged. But at the same time, the kinds of introspection that you get if you suffer from something like this means that you're probably going to be a much better human being, where you constantly try to understand, like try to attribute your successes to your peers, to your society, to like the ways you've been like brought up, which allows you to have a better check on your privileges, where you know like how privileges exist, which again makes it easier for you to not discredit someone else's like, you know, underprivileged situation, which creates probably a better world where people like, you know, like each other, like, I mean, like care for each other much more. Oh, nothing, but you said nothing instead of sadness. এখন উল্টা বলছো. That's a different thing entirely. Wait, what's this? Yes, is acha code gears থেকে random motion. Acha. This is actually like, I don't know, in one side you have absolute power where you bend a person to your will, which is terrible, but you probably can do a lot of good. On the other side, it's the fact that those people are probably going to feel terrible and like you're making them betray their principles. So I guess, yeah, I mean, what do you want me to talk about this? I mean, do you have a specific question? Yeah, exactly. Like, I think Infinite Tsukuyomi was in the same tournament. Again, the arguments in favor, like, acha. So arguments in favor are actually intuitive, that you can change the world, etc. What's in opposition? I think in opposition, you need to talk about how terrible it is to be coerced into doing something. So if you ever thought, if you've ever been manipulated in your life into doing something that you didn't want to do, but pore turns out like, turns out like you've done something or hurt someone, and someone's used you to make their ends meet, you probably know that it feels pretty terrible, that like you've been bent to your will. But Gias is sort of like, if you characterize it the way the info slide says, is sort of worse, because I mean, this looks as if that you will understand that your will is being bent, or even if it doesn't, it's like waking up and realized you've killed all of those people and you had like no control over it. It's enough to send someone crazy, and even if you manage to change the world or fix a lot of problems using it, the kind of damage you do to some of these people is incomparable to the benefits you bring. Again, this is similar to the Omela debate. Am I saying that right? I don't know. That the pain of this one individual or these many individuals who has to go through this loss of agency, so like for so many times, is incomparable to the kinds of benefits you bring to the rest of the world. Which is to say, most of the time, firstly, because these people won't be able to take in those benefits because of the trauma they've faced. But second, it's like saying that as long as I can help 5 other people, your life doesn't matter. And that's very hard to say, and that's very harsh on that one person. So why is that person, like, why should that person give up their own rights to serve 10 other people? I don't think like this is something that, I mean, you can prove, like someone can prove directly why this is like a good thing. So most of the time, I think you need to characterize how bad that pain on that individual is, and why that person should never be the battering ram for the kind of society you want to build. Obviously, can come up and characterize these as terrible people, but obviously to me, you can like try to break that characterization by saying that they could be coerced in other ways, and etc. How do you defend this motion if you're in Gov? Oh, if you're in Gov, acha. If you're in Gov, you kind of need to be kind of cutthroat and say that the kind of society you would bring, by like the kind of changes you make, affects so many people that those few people could be sacrifices. And then you need a lot of examples in history where you had a lot of good things. What? Oh, Sajid, you're so cute. In history where you have had a lot of good things, but some people had to suffer very badly for it. For instance, if you were to like, I don't know, liberate a particular piece of land from the Taliban, I guess some people have to like die very gruesome deaths, but overall it probably creates better lives for most other people in those society. So collectively, these people would have suffered forever. So I guess like for that, the scale of benefits is far too high for you to consider that. And like just talk about like any kind of just war. Right? Because every single just war has a lot of these casualties where you kind of have to justify it with the impacts and effects you bring. Yeah, finally, kind of comments. Okay, these comments are just Sajid saying weird things. Okay, I think I'm going to move a little bit into extensions now, because I really wanted to talk about that, but like Fardin said that he thinks I would be better in philosophy. Acha. So what I find the most interesting about BP debates, and this will help you in ascension a lot, is the way like is the way extension speaking works, right? Like, I think that's my favorite part of any debating right now. So first of all, what is an extension? I think there is a common misbelief that I know Sajid, my girlfriend is great and she's better than me, but that doesn't make me feel sad. Okay, so I think a nice, like, a common thing that, a common misconception you have is that a lot of times you think that content that's similar to your upper house is not an extension. That's like objectively wrong, right? Objectively false. Because like in every info slide, debater briefing of every major tournament you go to, they will say that anything's an extension, like anything that's new. So even if you said the same thing your upper house did in a sort of different way, that's still an extension. But the real question is, so no one gets to say that you didn't have an extension, right? Unless you literally repeated them word for word. The real question is, how impactful was your extension? And what should you extend in debates normally, right? So there are two separate things, two separate contexts in which you could talk about this. The first is, if your opposition is winning. So for instance, you're closing government, opening opposition has the upper hand. I think at that point, extensions are fairly easy to find because all you have to do is you have to find the gap in your openings case. And if you know the gap in your openings case, you basically can fill that gap. And all you have to do is flag a lot and say a lot that, look, I'm filling that gap. Hi, judges, that's what I'm doing right now. And then if you fill that gap, you automatically solve a big problem, right? But more importantly, what you essentially have to do is look at what your opposition lines of arguments are going towards, right? And then extrapolate to think like, what else could they argue, right? And your extensions are literally going to be whatever's missing at the debate. A very nice way to do this is to judge a little, right? So if you judge debates a lot, and if you've spent a significant time judging, you'll already build this sense that as a judge, you know, when the extension speaker walks up, you know, like what you need to hear to give him that debate. So if you can learn to judge the debates in between of your own debating, I think that's the best way to find an extension. But that's also easy because most of the times during the opening half debate, you are literally judging the debate. You have nothing to do at that point. Like building arguments makes no sense. All you have to do is judge and then think, okay, what's missing? If I add this, will that make that case complete? So that's pretty simple. I think what's harder is to extend when your opening half has been particularly great. Because at that point, you're like opposition's losing and they haven't been able to prove like major flaws in your opening half's case. So you literally need to come up with new things. So what are you going to do in these cases? I think there are a few things you can do. First, even if your opposition, like opening opposition in this instance, hasn't been able to win that debate or win those arguments, or defeat opening government, and opening government is still winning, it's mostly not going to be because they have entirely the wrong ideas. It's going to be because they're probably missing some key chunks of analysis. So they are mostly going to be, unless they're a really, really bad team, and most of the times you shouldn't assume that of your opposition. But like in most cases, they're probably on the right track and they're missing something. What you have to do then is to anticipate what exactly was the point they're missing, and then make an argument based on that, and make that argument based on why that thing was absent, like how that thing was absent in your opening speech, and you're basically providing it to them. That's possibly one way. The other way, and this is like something you have to do from prep, is that this is something Sadbhai taught me once a long time ago when I did proams with him and disappointed him really badly, is that when you debate an extension in prep time, the best idea is not probably for you to come up with a lot of arguments, because most of the times if your opening arguments are actually that, if your opening team is legit, they will probably say those things as well. But what you have to do is find out the key clashes in this debate. So you need to find out where government and opposition could really clash, and once you have all of that clashes, you can do either of find out which of these clashes none of the teams have touched, because then you can come up and say that, look, this is a very important clash and no one has touched it. Or secondly, what you can do is that you can find out the most important clash, and you can find out the missing pieces of analysis, and you can say that, okay, this is what we're going to do better. Acha. But that all of this sounds pretty self-explanatory. But then most of the times extension speeches still, you might give speeches and you might still think that, oh my God, hochche na keno, right? So a lot of this is because you don't flag things. And that's very important. So what you really, really need to do, and this is extremely important, is to always flag why your content wins you the debate. which is to say that once you've like focused on one specific issues, talk about why that focus is like, why the debate has to be focused on that issue. Now, obviously, if you're opening with the sort of wrong debate, then you can do this very easily. But what if they did everything right? What if they had all of those boxes checked? The thing is, it's very hard for in any DB debate for an opening side to take all arguments and spend adequate time analyzing that. So you'll always find some additional bits and pieces of analysis to do. But the trick is you need to always mention that, look, opening analyze this to this extent. We're going to extend it further to analyze to this additional extent. And then you need to show why this additional extent is what wins you that argument. And opening couldn't have won that argument or won that case without you being there. That's pretty simple, right? The other thing is to use framing very well in in extension speaking, right? So what does this look like? This pretty much looks like deciding what important parts of the, either what are the important bits of the debate, or what people what certain people act like or certain people are like. I can remember this one debate we did in AVP. What happened? The motion was this house would allow minority communities to not let a member of privileged of non-minority community to attend their school. So, for instance, there is an all-black school. ওইখানে basically black community সাদা মানুষকে ঢুকতে দিবে না, সাদা একটা বাচ্চা আসলে ঢুকতে দিবে না. So, we were closing, and instead of arguing principles and all that, in prep time, all we did was try to discuss who on their right minds would do this. I mean, if you're white, you're privileged, your schools are better, why would you send your kid to a black school? Turns out that probably because your circumstances don't help you much, and probably you live in that neighborhood, you're probably a poor person even within those privileged majority groups. And you kind of have to, because otherwise you have to send these kids far away. We had to though oppose the idea of taking these kids in. So at that point, we thought from the perspective of the schools. So what are these schools like? To us, it seemed like the only reason a school might not want to take a child is probably because those minority teachers or principals or students probably still suffered trauma or stuff from the kinds of things they see in media every day of how their race or minority group gets oppressed all the time. So they're afraid that giving these people access to their school is a problem, or the teachers are afraid that they don't have infrastructure to manage these kids to ensure that there are no conflicts. So what kind of schools are likely to allow these kids, right? Because the motion was this house would allow schools to make that choice. So we thought that a bunch of schools which had this infrastructure would be likely to allow these people in. So at that point, our framing looked like this. Look, in status quo, there are probably two types of schools, one of which have the resources to take these white kids in, and they will do so. And they will protect them, and they will give them a good education, and this white child will grow up thinking that minority groups are probably not all that bad, and integrating them with them, and probably helping these communities throughout their lives. So we basically co-opt a lot of the opposition's arguments. But second, there is also another kind of school which probably either doesn't have the resources or doesn't have the will to take these people. What happens when you force these people to take, schools to take these people? At that point, we talked about how these majority, children could extensively get bullied in these spaces by those minority groups. And that could create, exacerbate that cycle of hate. That could send that child to isolation. And because of that isolation, that could cause that child to act out, which creates a cycle in which he's constantly stuck in violence and he's constantly stuck in that. And ultimately, most of the times he ruins his entire life throughout that, right? But what happens afterwards is that society sees that when a white child was in a black school, black kids bully the crap out of them. And then they start making that argument that everyone is bad, so the minorities are also bad, and therefore probably we shouldn't it makes it much easier for hate groups to try to hijack that conversation by saying that these people, if we give them more leeway, they will probably hurt us, and therefore we shouldn't give them any more leeway. So that's pretty much the rhetoric a lot of white nationalists run on. And so this means that in the long run, you will exacerbate the situation. However, in our world, once you allow these schools to not take these kids, there is backlash, but comparatively it's lesser because there isn't any active bullying that happens, which is obviously going to be worse. But at the same time, the schools that do take these people in and create good examples could inspire these other schools who don't want to take these people in to gradually take these people in. Which is to say, in the longer, like in the much longer run, a lot of these schools would develop like into better schools, and a lot of that goodwill will probably transfer on. And in the longer run, the ratio of schools that want to take these kids to the ratio of ones who don't will probably increase. So we will probably be able to get to the most equitable place by not forcing anyone, by just letting these people take the natural course of action. So again, arguments like this is often made by teams in a lot of places where you simply say that this change is going to come organically, right? But for that, you need to kind of analyze the reason why this change doesn't happen in status quo, or like the factors that keep it from happening, and you need to introduce something that takes away those factors. For instance, in our case, we said that they had that inherent fear. That's the factor that didn't allow for this change to happen organically before. But immediately. But because these other schools who take these kids in can advertise and can like spread that mentality, it means in the longer run, that factor will actually go away in certain schools. But certain schools will take more time for those factors to go away. In certain schools, it will happen faster. We just need to give everyone the time they need to make that change. What happens the other way if your OO is great and CG is, what do you do as CO? Then you break down OO. That's simple. Like if your opposition, sorry. OO is great, CG is not. So okay, this is a case where both of the government benches have flopped. And they've not been able to do anything. In that case, I think you do the basic thing, right? Find out what clash, because there's obviously going to be a clash that they didn't prioritize as much or they didn't touch. So if you did the prep time right, and if you listed the clashes well enough, you're going to be able to find something. And at that point, you have to aggressively frame as why this is better content. But the second thing is, one thing often teams don't realize, that you can win debates by rebutting the crap out of everybody. And like that's something that happened to us in Ascension last year in the semis. So what happened was, like, our opening was quite good and we didn't have like very good extensions and whatnot. I mean, there were extensions, but they were a little derivative and like not groundbreaking. So what we did was we like refuted the opposition bench so much and tried to like manage to prove that their cases were so bad that we easily, like, comfortably took, I'm not sure if we took a second or a first, I think second, but like in some instances where your the difference between your extension and theirs and OGs is OOs is marginal, at CO whip, if you come up and like rebut the like hell out of everybody, like jodi mane shob kichu rebut korte paro, pura case namai dite paro, I think that will count as an extension too, because new rebuttals are also extensions in a way. So that can actually potentially put you above OO if OO hasn't been able to sufficiently like rebut it to that extent. So you have always room to do something in the debate. And in some cases where your OO is that great and you know that you can't win, at least take that second, because in BP that's just as okay. Because to break, if you're second in all of your rounds, you break. That's like, that's simple, right? Okay. Abrar, assuming technology exists, this house would forcibly return memories. His memory situation, a man who married two kids, happy life. Okay. So, opponent refuses to. Okay. All right. I think the first thing you need to do is you need to prove that other people need this guy, and other people who's also mourning the loss of those two kids and that wife need the emotional support that this guy could probably bring to the table. And the second thing you can say is, you have to prove, is that his refusal to like re-enter his old life is because of the fact that he's lost all of those memories that made him. So I mean, Agronauts ওই ইয়েটা কি, হিরোটার নাম কি, টিবিএ নামটা, ওর জাজ নিয়ে একটা philosophical like experiment ছিল যে if like throughout the journey, block by block, you separate, like, you take out all of the existing like woods, like pieces of wood or planks, and you add new ones, and like you do it for the entire ship. So the entire ship is now made of planks of wood that didn't really exist in the original ship, and none of the original stuff is remaining. Is it still the same ship? একটা জিনিস আছে, right? So similarly, you can do this with people, right? If all of your body is replaced by other cells, and actually that happens because your cells die and new cells are born every day, right? Are you really the same person? If you ask that question, you'll realize the only thing that makes you that same person is your memories. It's your lived experiences. That's what makes you who you are. So when he loses that memory, he loses all of those things. So obviously there's a utilitarian argument on ops side that this person had a terrible life and he doesn't need to go back to that life because he's happy now, and happiness is all that matters. But you can argue that assuming technology exists for us to live infinite sukhimata, or like live in a simulation for all of our lives, like in the Matrix, would you do it? A lot of people would still find it iffy. A lot of people would still say, I don't want to do it. And the reason is because we don't just care about happiness. We want that happiness to be authentic. We want it to be happiness that we feel that we've earned and is real, right? And that decision, you need to prove, that can't be made by this man in his current state. Because in his current state, he can't quantify all of those memories he had, all of those friends he had, and the ways that those friends had initially made him feel. So like, because he can't quantify that, he can't make a rational decision to not return to his own life. If he can't make that decision, then if those people's needs are really, really high, then you can make us like somewhat of a case. But I still don't think that's enough. এখানে আরেকটু কিছু আছে। I think we need to somehow prove that this new life would always seem hollow to this individual. And the reason he refuses to return to his old life is because he sees how leaving his new family. Okay, can I add a problem? Why would you deprive the new family? My God, this is so much. This is literally a Hindi serial thing. Anyway, what's the comparative? It's hard to argue when you say that this person doesn't want to return at all, because at that point, like, you have to literally take away his agency and say that he doesn't have the capabilities to make his rational decision. Okay, so our rationality develops over time. It's based on all of our memories. So why is it more preferable for this individual to be that same person who's grown up like this, rather than just being happy? It is somehow you have to prove. I don't know how. This is a very weird motion. I don't like it at all. Perhaps some little bit about how it's insulting to to the existing families. Still doesn't seem like a good enough reason to like take away someone who's in a relatively happy life and put them into a world of pain. I mean, it seems like a lot. Acha, perhaps you could argue that assuming the technology exists for him to return to his old life, possibly technology exists to wipe those memories away again. Perhaps he's better served to take that decision. Okay, একটা জিনিস হচ্ছে the decision like he took to so he never took a decision to forget these memories. So that inherent decision was not his own to begin with. If that inherent decision is not his own to begin with, and it happened, and at this point he doesn't have the capabilities to properly gauge whether whether like he really wants it or not, because again, he's not the same person anymore. So at that point, I guess you could argue that the fairest thing to do, most equitable thing to do, is to reverse it, because the first decision wasn't willing as well. So therefore, the second decision not being willing is not that big of a problem. But it's like you accidentally being sent to a better place and then wanting to stay with that better place. Why shouldn't you be allowed to? I don't know. It feels a little lock-tilted to me. Lauren, what if we had an all-right extension but brought in new perspective, but because I'm old, the rest of the teams can't engage to my speech and what? How do you even? Okay. So this is fairly simple. So the burdens from opening is kind of like lower as well. So for instance, everybody knows like very, very well, the sheep of Theseus. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right either. I have a pronunciation problem. Thanks, Zaid. Okay. So because you're opening and you don't have a lot of time to come up with those crisp and nice extensions, it will always be the case that your arguments won't have as much depth. So from you just have to cover a lot of ground, I guess. I think what you need to do is you need to look to the central part of your case, and you need to look to the most important thing that you did in this debate, and you need to use POIs to bring them back. So you need to ask closing government a lot of POIs, and if they ask, don't just ask them a question like, ask, like, present your point again and ask them, force them to engage. Tell them, like, why won't you engage to this? So that's a very good way to, like, remind the judges that you did this. But then thing is, like, a opening closing এর জিনিসটা না অনেকটা like it's like this, like in the moment you just have to do what you can, and later on you actually do have minimal ways to interact. So the benefit from opening is the fact that you have the ability to take away the ability of closing to say a lot of things, because you can take away their content. So try to cover as much as like the central grounds of that debate, because every debate like has a central issue. So if you take that central issue and do that debate well, there's like, it's very hard for closings to do anything about it, because then they'll have to come up with a side issue and then somehow try to make that seem more important. It's a lot of work, and like most of the times you will probably get away with it from like OG or OO. How to oppose organic change arguments. Number one, it's not going to be fast enough. So can't wait so long for that change while other people are dying or getting oppressed or whatever. That's the easiest way to do it, right? The easiest thing to do it, but obviously not complete, right? Number two, talk about why there are factors that prevent organic change from happening. I mean, a lot of these organic change arguments people make are like, okay, changes will happen, and that's how it, like, you know, that's how things will get better. But like, in a lot of cases, they have to like they don't show how it really happens, right? So you need to again analyze the factors for which that organic change is supposed to happen, and then say why those factors won't be the same or won't work. What's the best way to oppose coercion arguments? এটা না শুরুতে বলছি, হ্যাঁ. So one way is obviously to show that it's not actually coerced, and like explain why it's not coerced. So for instance, you can show how these people had the opportunity to look to other media, so it's their fault they didn't. But the other thing that like most people I haven't seen do but can be done is to show emotions, and to show using that emotions that these things are very important to those people, and they're not going to take the coercive choice. This also depends on what kind of coercion you're talking about. Like if you're talking about like monetary coercion, then it's very easy to sell that like punishing these people is so important to the victims that they will never really take the easy way of money out. They will always want to punish them first, and will only take the money when they don't see a way, right? So like if you portray why the pain is so great and why someone who's been wronged at that level wants to punish them, and the only reason they don't want to is because either they feel they won't succeed, or either they feel that it will give them more pain, or their PTSD doesn't let them. And at that point, forcing them to do that is cruel in and of itself. So it's not coercion really, it's the fact that they genuinely feel that this is the better decision. Wait, OOs, not OOCO. Okay, because I'm CEO, the rest of the teams can't. Okay. Because you're CEO, my OG can't respond to your speech. I guess take POIs from OG. If you're CEO, like you have like the ability to just directly ask OG for POIs. So like, bro, if there is any POI from OG, I'll take it. That's the easiest way to do it. I think I've taken a lot of time. Really sorry, I didn't come prepared, primarily because although Fardeen contacted me in the morning, I sort of fell asleep and didn't see it until like somewhere like around 7 when I said that, okay, I can do it, but I was only free at around 8, which is why I haven't had a lot of things prepared. So a lot of things I said are like answers to your questions or things off the top of my head. So perhaps at a later date, if you like give me a more specific thing to talk about, I can like, you know, come up with that. Thanks for being there, I guess. If you have any more questions, go ask. Otherwise, I'll let's end it here. Hello. If there is any more questions, I'm going to answer that. But if not, Acha, I don't think anyone else is asking anything. So bye. I'm sorry, Ornella, you just joined way too late. I have to go. See you guys soon later on. There's a mosquito. I was trying to catch it, so like not making any movements. Bye.